بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. نويت تعلم وتعليم وتذكر وتذكير النفع انتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وبسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم، ودعاء إلى الهدى ودلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. Imam Marzuqi rahimahullah ta'ala, and he finishes the introduction with وَبَعْدُ فَعَلًا بِوُجُوبِ الْمَعْرِفَةِ مِنْ وَاجِبٍ لِلَّهِ 20 صِفَةً. And so the fifth of the adabs of the katib we call Fasl al-Khitab. And the Fasl al-Khitab here is what's going to separate the introduction from the main body of the text. Fasl al-Khitab. The Imams rahimahullah ta'ala, they differ upon who was the very first person to use Fasl al-Khitab. The basis of it is Amma Ba'd, or sometimes as an abbreviation it's the term Wa Ba'd, as the Imam uses here, Wa Ba'd Fa'alam. And some of them say that it's saying Adam alayhi salam, who's the first, and it is Fasl al-Khitab. Others, as in the Quran, explicitly mentioned in the Quran, the dominant opinion, it's saying Dawood alayhi salam, who's the first to use Fasl al-Khitab. And others have the forefather of the Prophet ﷺ, and Ka'b ibn Lu'ay, the great Khatib, and the forefather of the Rasul ﷺ, and of Quraysh, of the 9 inner clans of Quraysh. He was the first with Fasl al-Khitab. Others point towards the Prophet ﷺ himself, and others point towards the Tabi'i, Sahban ibn Wa'il, the first to use Fasl al-Khitab. The dominant opinion, Sayyidina Dawood, rahimahullah ta'ala. We now, inshallah ta'ala, we move from his introduction, rahimahullah ta'ala, to the main body and purpose of the text. In the statement, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَبَعْدْ فَعَلًا بِوُجُوبِ الْمَعْرِفَةِ مِنْ وَاجِبٍ لِلَّهِ 20 صِفَةً. To proceed, so now it is incumbent to believe the 20 attributes are necessary for God. And this line, it has a great number of precursors that we must, inshallah ta'ala, engage in order to contextualize theology, and in particular divinity. The first of them, he says, fa'alam. And so here, this alludes to knowledge and the importance of knowledge. And knowledge here that the Imams rahimahullah ta'ala, and he point to al-idrak al-jazim. And so by knowledge, we're speaking about certainty. Okay, certainty, al-idrak al-jazim, it is absolute cognition, absolute cognizance of an affair. And that absolute cognition or cognizance, it alludes to what? The issue of certainty, of one being certain. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, al-Asqalani, inside of his work in Mustalah al-Hadith rahimahullah ta'ala, Nukhbat al-Fikr, he makes mention, al-ilm yufidul yaqeen. He said that knowledge, what it bequeaths or it connotes certainty. And so the Imam rahimahullah ta'ala, he fa'alam, and this is obviously of greater importance when we speak about the science of theology, which is a science of certainty. It doesn't embrace conjecture, it doesn't embrace doubt whatsoever, as inshallah ta'ala we'll see. وَبَعْدُ فَعَلًا بِوُجُوبِ الْمَعْرِفَةِ. And says, so now it is incumbent to believe. And so now when these terms are used like wujub, okay, jaiz, etc., it points to different types of rulings that we have inside of quote-unquote the law, as well as what we have inside of theology. And so بِوُجُوبِ الْمَعْرِفَةِ, the Imam rahimahullah ta'ala herein is speaking about al-ahkam al-shar'iyya, al-ahkam al-shar'iyya, yani khitab Allah, al-muta'allaq bi-af'al al-mukallafina, talaban. Okay, this is the address of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that concerns the acts of those who are legally and charged by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a talab. And as a talab, it means it's a commandment by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Regardless whether a commandment by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a commandment for the performance of an act or for the abstention. If it's a commandment for the performance of an act, then that is what we're going to call wajib, wujub, or that is what we're going to call mandub or marghub. And if it's a commandment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the abstention of an act, that's what we're going to call haram, or that's what we're going to call makruh. And then depending upon whether that commandment or that abstention, the commandment to perform or the commandment to abstain, is unequivocal or not, then that's what differentiates between what is wajib and what is mandub, A wajib is an unequivocal command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the performance of an act, whereas mandub is not unequivocal. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to a degree, yet he deputes choice to the mukallaf, to the one who's been legally in charge. وَكَذَلِكَ, and likewise also with that which is considered to be haram. What differentiates haram from makruh is a haram that's an unequivocal command by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for abstention, whereas in terms of that which is considered makruh or disliked, and that commandment is not unequivocal. Herein, this is what you call al-ahkam al-shar'iyya. Okay, these are legal rulings, and obviously they're discussed inside of the science of legal theory. And so the Imam rahimahullah ta'ala, he's speaking first and foremost about the legal injunction for ma'rifah. And ma'rifah here is faith, is understood. The Imams rahimahullah ta'ala would define ma'rifah, our next statement inside of his line, as radiyallahu ta'ala al-i'tiqad, yani al-jazim al-mutabaq lil-waqi' an dalilin. Okay, they're going to define al-ma'rifah as al-i'tiqad al-jazim. It's an absolute belief. Some of the Imams use a tasdeeq al-jazim. It's absolute conviction. An absolute conviction, once again, it points here to the issue of certainty. The theology or knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, belief in Allah ta'ala, or faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala must be absolute. There could be not any degree of doubt whatsoever. The Imams will speak about 3 degrees of doubt, whether you're going to call it wahm, or whether you're going to call it sheikh, or whether you're going to call it dhann. All of these are degrees of doubt. And if something is sheikh, that means it's 50-50. If something is wahm, that your belief is less, quote unquote, in terms of reality, it's less than 50%, it's going to hold true. But if something is dhann, as an example, it's 51 to 99%. But the point is, all of them have varying degrees of doubt. And the science of theology, the science of faith, does not embrace one iota of doubt. The Imams, rahimahullah ta'ala, have concurred upon the fact that anybody who has one iota of doubt is a disbeliever. And so, a tasdeeq al-jazim, al-mutabaq lil-waqi', the Imams by definition here, for ma'rifah, okay, to translate it as belief, and so no, it is incumbent to believe, is that al-mutabaq lil-waqi', that it must concur to reality, it must correspond to reality. And by reality, it means, radiyallahu anhu wa rahum, al-wujud al-khariji. Al-wujud al-khariji, it means it's not something that exists, quote unquote, inside of the actual confines of the mind. What you call al-wujud al-dhihni. It's something that exists inside of your mind, but it has no existential reality beyond the mind. No wujud al-khariji. And so, mutabaq al-waqi', that it must correspond to how things are beyond the confines of the human being, beyond the confines of the human mind, and dalil. And there must be proof for it. Okay, there must be proof that substantiates that belief that you have. The Imams rahimahullah ta'ala are odds about a person who claims belief but cannot substantiate, quote unquote, their belief based upon sound proofs. Of the Imams rahimahullah ta'ala will consider such a person to be a disbeliever. The Imams of the Sunnusiyya, and they're going to hold to that position, Sunnusiyya from the Ash'a'ira radiyallahu ta'ala anhum wardahum. Whereas others rahimahullah ta'ala was also considered to be the strongest opinion, that a person depends upon what intellectual capacity. If somebody is able to employ proofs, in particular here in rational proofs, to substantiate belief, and they fail to do so, then they're considered to be a disobedient believer. Either it's disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His commandment, fa'alam, to know. Allah ta'ala commands us to know. Otherwise, if somebody does not have the intellectual capacity as such, then the Imams rahimahullah ta'ala consider them to be a believer bereft of disobedience in this instance, i.e. sound. And so here, وَبَعْدُ فَفَعْلًا بِوُجُوبِ الْمَعْرِفَةِ, to proceed, so no, it is incumbent to believe. And أول واجب على الإنسان معرفة الله بالاستقانة. The first incumbent deed upon the human being is to know God with certainty. Okay, that the Imam rahimahullah ta'ala he says, من واجب لله 20 صفة, he says that 20 attributes are necessary for the divine Jalla Jalala wa Ta'ala Ta'azamatu. That will open up the discussion about the hukm, and the hukm al-aqli, intellectual judgments or judgments of the mind as it relates to that which exists, i.e. the nature of existence in and of itself. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.